This is not a polite story from a political correspondent's desk, and it's not yet another tale from the Knesset about bills, coalitions, and budget negotiations. This is the story of a man who turned grief into a political weapon and Israel's public life into his private battlefield theater. Benjamin Netanyahu, a man you either worship or hate. There is no third option. For some, he is the last bastion of Israeli strength, cunning and cold-blooded strategy. For others, a master manipulator, a cynical player who turned democracy into a piano. He plays whenever it suits him. But before he became the prime minister who held office more times than anyone in Israel's history, before he walked into the Blue House as if it were his own kitchen, before he played the White House, Moscow, and Tehran like a poker game on the cover of Time, before all of that, he was just the brother of a fallen soldier. Yoni Netanyahu, commander of the elite Sayeret Matkal unit, Israel's equivalent of a top-tier special forces group, was killed during the legendary Entebbe operation in 1976. After his death, he became a symbol of martyr-like sacrifice for a strong, independent Israel. And Ben? Ben decided his brother's death would not be wasted. That day, he wasn't on the runway, he didn't carry a rifle, he didn't storm the terminal, but he stepped into his brother's boots, and he never took them off. From that moment on, Netanyahu stopped being just a citizen. He became the guardian of one single idea, that Israel can never afford weakness. Never. Nowhere. This is not just politics. This is a personal crusade, a political vendetta, a mission that began in the shadow of the flag covering Yoni's coffin. This episode is not just a story about Benjamin Netanyahu. It's a story about what happens when mourning turns into ambition, when national trauma becomes political capital, when an entire state becomes just a board and its leader holds not chess pieces, but grenades. In our story, we'll move through his childhood in the shadow of a historian father, through Harvard and Manhattan, through special forces units and the United Nations, through campaigns, assassinations, shocking deals with Donald Trump, war in Gaza, and a game for power that no one fully controls anymore. These episodes won't tell you who Benjamin Netanyahu is. They'll tell you why he is so dangerously good at being who he is. Because he is not just a prime minister. He is a phenomenon, the operating system of Israeli political survival. A man who never stops campaigning, never lowers his guard, and never, absolutely never, forgets what it means to lose. Here begins the story of a politician you cannot crop out of any frame, and who will probably direct the final act himself. But before we reach the White House, before we show you his TikTok campaign videos and the umbrella he uses to shield himself from the rain of scandals, we'll start where it all began, with his father, with America, with death. Because no one becomes Netanyahu overnight. You have to survive a tragic story and then rewrite it. It doesn't begin in Jerusalem. It doesn't begin in Tel Aviv. It doesn't begin in the Blue House. It begins at the desk of Benjamin Netanyahu, historian, professor, ideologue. A father who didn't tell bedtime stories but quoted Zionist documents from the 15th century in the original. A man who could lock himself in his study for 2 weeks and write non-stop, fueled only by tea and resentment that the world still hadn't recognized his greatness. Benzion was not a regular father. He didn't teach his kids to ride bikes. He taught them how to survive as Jews in a dangerous world that would never stop testing them. In his eyes, no Jew had the right to be naive. Every Jew had to be ready. He trusted no one. Not the left, not the right, not Europe, not America, not even Israel's own elites. In his dictionary, compromise was just a rest stop on the road to defeat. In the Netanyahu home, they didn't talk about feelings. They talked about the fall of the Second Temple, the Shoah, pogroms in Kishinev, the betrayal of the West, the strength to endure, and the treacherous smile of tolerance. No one said, "I love you, son." They said, "If you're not ready to fight for what's yours, you've already lost." Young Benjamin, the youngest of 3 brothers, grows up in the shadow of his father's genius. But instead of disappearing in it, he does something else. He starts to observe. He watches as his father doesn't get published because Israeli universities boycott him, as he's too hard for academia, too anti-left, too brutally Zionist. Ben doesn't rebel, he doesn't protest, he studies. He absorbs everything, every lecture, every sigh, every sarcastic jab at naive pacifists who'd trade Jerusalem for a promise on CNN. Benzion writes massive books on Spanish Jewry, the Inquisition, eternal struggle. Instead of comic books, Ben reads his father's notes. Instead of seeking acceptance, he seeks strategy. He knows the names of the executioners by heart. He knows how often the line between survival and annihilation comes down to a single decision on a single evening. That becomes his survival code. This is not a childhood you tell charming anecdotes about on a talk show. This is training. As if the father were not raising a son, but drilling the future leader of an underground republic. In this house, every conversation is a briefing, every dinner a strategy seminar, every mistake a strength test. Every why has to have hard geopolitical logic behind it. You want to ask a question? You'd better back it up with Herzl, Jabotinsky, or some sabotage manual. There is no room for childhood. There is only room for readiness. And then comes the decision. We're leaving for the States. There's no space here. Ben lands in Philadelphia, America, an English-speaking world. A culture where laughter is currency and charisma is a fight for dominance. And there, for the first time, Netanyahu starts to become something more than just a son. His accent disappears. His ease appears. He learns to play the game where being right is not enough. You have to sell it. But underneath, the mechanism still ticks. A rigid, icy strategic machine that never forgets where it came from. Ben doesn't become American. He learns the language of the adversary. He doesn't want to belong. He wants to dominate. He turns his father's frustration into his own self-confidence, silence into camera time, the feeling of exclusion into a flawless media accent. All with one thought at the back of his mind: we will never be nobodies again. But what will he do with this new voice? And can you weld together his father's brutal narrative with mass media, microphones, and Wall Street? Benjamin Netanyahu doesn't come to America like a typical immigrant. He doesn't arrive to breathe the air of freedom. He arrives with a life code written in hard typeface by a historian father, and it's not a code you unpack. It's a code that turns a new world into a new stage. Netanyahu in Philadelphia is the kid who sits in class with Americans but never stops analyzing their tone of voice, their place in the group, the power of their media, their emotional reflexes. He scans them not like classmates but like an analyst, building a matrix of behaviors he'll copy only if they give him an edge. He speaks English better than most of them. No accent, fast, with American tempo and a TV smile. But underneath is his father's cold diction and the distrust of people once betrayed by the West. Netanyahu is not some kid from a diplomacy academy. He's the side product of pogroms, the Holocaust, and a survival ideology. But he knows that in this country, narrative is everything. So before he steps into politics, he steps into the language. Harvard, MIT, Boston, New York. For most people, these are places you build a career. For him, they're a lab. He studies marketing, management, media. But what he's really doing is translating his father's worldview into CNN format. In New York, he opens a consulting firm, but it's really a testing ground. He tests language, tests emotions, tests how to turn Israeli fear into an American story about strength. He adopts a lighter name, Ben Nitai, because America doesn't swallow Middle Eastern surnames easily. And he doesn't want to come off as an outsider. He wants to appear like a high-end product worth listening to. He starts appearing on TV, in debates, on campuses. Every appearance is training. Every camera is one more step towards mastering fear and hope. His subjects? Terrorism, survival, the Middle East. But that's just the packaging. Inside, there's something larger. Ben is learning how to manufacture reality through media, how to manage emotions, how to turn facts into messaging and messaging into power. It's not about debate anymore. It's about crafting a narrative that wins before the question is even asked. At the same time, he never cuts the cord with Israel. He comes back for reserve duty, serves in Sayeret Matkal, takes leave from America to join operations in the Negev, 1 foot in the orbit of U.S. security circles, the other in a special forces unit in the desert. It's not a split personality, it's strategy. He's building 2 characters, the media expert and the hard commando, and he plans to fuse them one day, in politics. But first, tragedy has to hit 1976. Operation Entebbe. Yoni, his brother, dies in the raid. And at that moment, Ben stops being an analyst, stops being a debate moderator, stops being Nietzsche. He becomes Netanyahu, a man with a mission, and a microphone, and a plan. What will he do with those 3 things? But before we trace his transformation, we go back to Entebbe, thousands of kilometers from Israel. On the ramp of a military plane lies the body of Yoni Netanyahu, national hero, commander, symbol, and brother. In Israel, euphoria. Hostages are freed. The operation is legend. The Knesset applauds. Generals cry. People say, "We don't leave our own behind." But one man stands in the back, silent. Benjamin. He didn't rescue the hostages. He wasn't at the terminal. But he lost his brother, and he will become the voice that turns this operation into the cornerstone of a new Israeli mentality. Entebbe doesn't break him. Entebbe defines him, not emotionally, strategically. Netanyahu does not collapse. He shifts into action mode. He analyzes media reactions, records narratives, dissects the structure of the national myth. He knows Israel has just bought itself a new story about who it is. And he, Ben, will be its main narrator. He comes back from America. He drops the Ben Nietzsche label. He drops corporate PR and consulting salons. He returns to Israel not as a regular citizen, but as the heir to a myth. Yoni had no children, but he had a brother. And Ben understands that from now on, he has to live for 2. Yoni's death is not the ending. It's Act 1, and he is the scriptwriter of the rest. He doesn't start with politics. He starts with memory. He organizes the publication of Yoni's writings, founds the Yonatan Netanyahu Institute, meets the hostages' families, speaks at rallies. But none of his speeches are simple remembrance. Every line is a rhetorical front line. With a microphone in his hand, he doesn't talk about memories. He talks about necessity. We can't trust anyone. We have to have strength, not pity. And the crowd starts buying into it. Not just as remembrance of a hero, but as a new political code. He talks about strength, about unbending will, about the Jew who cannot rely on the UN, the West, or any system of law, only on himself. And he says it not with grief, but with cold, measured certainty. It's not mourning. It's the birth of an ideology. The America he got to know taught him one thing. Morality doesn't win elections. Strength does. Fear, even more. So Ben begins to practice a new species of politics, emotional realism. He doesn't promise peace. He promises advantage. He doesn't talk about justice. He talks about survival. Every sentence is like a poster, loud, sharp, unambiguous. And people, starving for certainty in times of chaos, listen. He appears in the U.S., in Israel, on campuses, on TV. He becomes the face of Israel's fight against terror, not as an expert, as the brother of the fallen hero. Every speech, every debate, every microphone is another brick in his future mandate. And still no one sees that this is already a political campaign without formal elections. In 1984, he's appointed Israel's ambassador to the UN. He's 35, 0 diplomatic experience. But who needs protocol when you have a prepared speech and your brother's death as moral armor? The UN is not a negotiation hall for him. It's a TV studio, cameras, a global stage. When he walks into the building, he doesn't look for common ground. He looks for the perfect cut. And he cuts. With speeches about Israel as the last fortress of civilization, about the UN as a theater of the absurd, about pacifists fed by CNN who are beautiful corpses that just don't know it yet, and about Israel, which will not die for anyone's ideals. He cuts between the lines, too. In his opponent's eyes, he sees fear. In the audience's eyes, fascination. He's unpredictable, brutal, impolite, but he says exactly what many Israelis don't dare to say out loud. People start talking about him, quoting him, fighting over him. That's the moment Netanyahu becomes an undeniable fixture of Israel's political landscape. He's not a politician like the others. He's a designer of emotions with a transplanted soldier's heart, a human-shaped message, a broadcast to the world. We won't give in, we won't apologize, we won't back off. His election campaign started on that airplane ramp next to Yoni's body, and to this day, it's still running. Benjamin Netanyahu was not born a politician. He was programmed into one. By his father, by history, by his brother's death. His childhood is not a story of love, it's mental boot camp for survival. His youth, a laboratory of influence. His pain, a tool. While others went to school, he observed, analyzed, learned how to construct his own reality. And when he returned to Israel, he was no longer just Ben. He was a narrative, a project, an operating system of survival designed to replace doubt with iron certainty. In the second part of this story, we'll enter the world Netanyahu began to seize step by step. We'll see how he built the image of a new Israel, strong, unyielding, sometimes brutal. We'll look behind the scenes of his campaigns, his entry into the Knesset, his first enemies, and his first fanatics. We'll show how mourning turned into politics, and politics into theater where every gesture matters. Because Benjamin Netanyahu did not come for power. He came for control over the narrative. And he had everything he needed to claim it. A microphone, a myth, and a mission. This was only Act 1, and the curtain hasn't even trembled yet. Thank you for watching, and I invite you to the next episode of The Alphabet of Benjamin Netanyahu. If this story caught your attention, hit subscribe. It's one click for you, and for me, it's a sign that it's worth creating more. See you in the next episode.